Trust is a glass palace that takes decades of sacrifice to build, but only a single vibrating notification to shatter into a million jagged pieces. Elias Thorne lived in a world of absolute certainty, anchored by a woman the entire town considered a living saint. After 14 years of marriage, he thought he knew every rhythm of Julianne's heart, every secret behind her smile, and every truth in her eyes. He was wrong. A forgotten phone on a granite countertop was about to pull back the curtain on a theater of lies so elaborate it would leave his soul cold. This isn't just a story of a broken home. It's a chronicle of how a man of peace became an architect of absolute public ruin. The morning started with the familiar, comforting scent of expensive roast coffee and the frantic, rhythmic tapping of Julianne's heels against the dark hardwood floor. To anyone watching from the outside, they were the absolute portrait of suburban success in the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Crestview Heights. Elias Thorne, a senior architectural consultant, was a man who valued structure, blueprints, and solid foundations above all else. He believed his marriage to Julianne Vance was his greatest masterpiece, a 14-year monument to stability, shared dreams, and unwavering devotion. Julianne was a high-level executive at Horizon Logistics, a woman whose charisma was so potent it seemed to fill the cracks in any room she entered. She was the one who remembered every neighbor's birthday, the one who organized the charity drives, the one everyone pointed to when they spoke of a perfect wife. But perfection is often just a very well-maintained mask. On that Tuesday, Julianne was a whirlwind of frantic energy. She was stuffing documents into her leather briefcase, her eyes darting toward the clock every few seconds. She mentioned, almost too casually, that the board of directors was breathing down her neck and that a massive project delivery required her presence at the office until late into the night. She might even have to skip dinner. Elias, the ever-supportive partner, simply nodded. He offered a warm smile, kissed her lightly on the cheek, and told her not to overwork herself. He watched her car pull out of the driveway, never imagining that the woman he had shared a bed with for over a decade was driving to a life he didn't recognize. As the silence of the empty house settled in, Elias felt a strange, prickly sensation on the back of his neck. It wasn't a thought, and it certainly wasn't a suspicion. It was a vibration of the atmosphere. Something felt off. It was in the way her voice had hit a slightly higher pitch than usual, or perhaps the way she had looked at her own reflection in the hallway mirror with a strange predatory intensity. He tried to shake it off. He had a mountain of blueprints to review for his own remote workday. He walked into the kitchen to pour a second cup of coffee, and that was when he saw it. There, resting next to a half-eaten piece of dry toast, was Julianne's smartphone. It was an expensive, sleek device that she usually kept glued to her palm. For a moment, Elias considered grabbing his keys and racing after her to drop it off at her office. He even picked it up, intending to head to the garage. But as the glass touched his skin, the device came to life. It didn't ring, it just pulsed, a silent, rhythmic vibration that felt like a heartbeat. On the locked screen, a short, direct notification appeared. It was a message from a contact named Marcus Sterling. The words were brief, but they felt like a physical blow to Elias's sternum. "I've booked the room for noon. Can't wait to have you all to myself today. That meeting room just wasn't enough yesterday." Elias stood frozen in the center of his sun-drenched kitchen. The world around him seemed to lose its color, fading into a dull, sickening gray. He knew Marcus Sterling. Marcus wasn't just Julianne's colleague. He was a man who had been a guest in this very house. He had sat at their dining table, toasted to Elias's promotions, and even helped Elias fix a leak in the garden shed 2 summers ago. He was a friend. He was a man Elias had trusted with his home and his history. The shock was a cold, numbing wave. Elias's hands began to clamor with a cold sweat. Part of him, the part that still loved the ghost of the woman who had just left, screamed at him to put the phone back down. It begged him to delete the memory of the message and pretend he had never seen it. But a darker, more primal instinct took over. He realized that for years he might have been the only person in the room who wasn't in on the joke. He knew her passcode. They had always prided themselves on having a no-secrets policy. How bitter that thought tasted now. With trembling fingers, he entered the numbers, and the phone yielded its secrets. He went straight to the gallery. The floor didn't just fall away, it dissolved into an abyss. There were hundreds of photos. They weren't just casual snapshots. They were a digital diary of a double life. He saw Julianne and Marcus in the back of a car, their faces flushed with a secret joy he hadn't seen in his wife for years. He saw photos of them at a motel in a neighboring county, a place Julianne had claimed she was staying at for corporate retreats. There were screenshots of hotel reservations, dirty jokes shared during business meetings, and worst of all, videos. Elias made the mistake of pressing play on one of them. The sound of Julianne's laughter, that musical, enchanting sound he once cherished, filled the kitchen. But she wasn't laughing at a joke of his. She was whispering into Marcus's ear, telling him that she had never felt more alive and that her life at home with Elias felt like a slow, suffocating death. Marcus's voice responded, low and triumphant. "He doesn't deserve you. We're just biding our time until we can be together for real."
Elias sat down on the kitchen chair, his legs finally giving out. He felt a violent, visceral urge to scream, to smash the phone, to burn house down with all their memories inside. But as he stared at the digital evidence of his own humiliation, the heat of his anger began to crystallize into something much more dangerous. It turned into a sharp, crystalline coldness. He realized that Julianne hadn't just made a mistake. She and Marcus had built a monument of deceit, brick by brick, while using Elias's love as the mortar. They had laughed at him. They had treated his home as a staging ground for their betrayal. He stood up, his movements now slow and methodical. He went to his office and grabbed a high-speed data cable. He plugged Julianne's phone into his workstation and began the process of cloning everything. Every photo, every video, every time-stamped GPS location, and every nauseating voice note. He organized them into folders. He labeled them. He created a chronological map of their affair. It was the most heartbreaking project he had ever designed, but it was also the most thorough. By 11 a.m., Elias was no longer a grieving husband. He was a prosecutor. He understood that a quiet confrontation would only lead to more lies. Julianne was too good at gaslighting. She would find a way to make it his fault, or she would cry and beg for a second chance she didn't deserve. No, this required a surgical strike. He opened a new, encrypted email account. He spent an hour drafting the message. It was short, clinical, and devastating. Subject: the truth about Horizon Logistics executive standards. In the body of the email, he wrote, "Integrity is the foundation of any institution. Please find attached the evidence of how your leadership spends their project hours and business retreats." He didn't just send it to the CEO, he BCC'd the entire HR department, the board of directors, the primary regional clients Julianne handled, and their mutual social circle. But he wasn't done. He found the email address for Elena Sterling, Marcus's wife, a woman who had 3 young children and believed her husband was a hard-working provider. Elias stared at the send button. His heart was no longer racing. It was a steady, heavy thud. He knew that once he clicked this, the woman he knew would be destroyed. The life they had would be ashes, but he also knew that the life they had was already a lie. He was just the one finally setting it on fire. He clicked. The fallout was nearly instantaneous. At the Horizon Logistics headquarters, Julianne was in the middle of a high-stakes presentation. The room was filled with senior partners and a major client. Suddenly, phones began to ping around the table. Laptops flashed with new mail notifications. The CEO, a man known for his strict moral code and family-first corporate branding, opened the attachment. His face turned a deep, mottled purple. He looked up from his screen, staring at Julianne with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Julianne, sensing the shift in the room, tried to continue her speech about logistics efficiency, but her voice trailed off as she saw the client's face pale. One of the junior associates, who had already opened the photos, accidentally let a gasp escape. The CEO stood up, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Julianne, my office, now." Julianne followed him, her legs feeling like lead. As she walked through the open-plan office, she saw her colleagues staring at her. Some were whispering, some were looking away in embarrassment, and others were looking at her with pure, unadulterated judgment. When she entered the CEO's office, Marcus was already there. He looked like he had seen a ghost. The CEO didn't offer them chairs. He simply turned his monitor around. There was a photo of the two of them in the Horizon Logistics parking lot, locked in an embrace that left nothing to the imagination. Below it was a transcript of a voice note where they joked about charging a motel stay to the company's miscellaneous travel fund. "You have 5 minutes to clear your desks," the CEO said, his voice as sharp as a razor. "Security will escort you both from the building. Do not look for a reference. Do not expect a severance. If I ever see your faces near this firm again, I will involve the legal team for the misuse of corporate funds." Marcus tried to speak, his voice cracking. "Sir, please, it was a mistake." "A mistake?" the CEO barked. "You've been using company time and company money to conduct a sordid affair while pretending to be leaders in this firm. You've compromised our reputation with our biggest clients. Get out, now." As they were let out by security, Julianne felt the world spinning. She had lost her career, her status, and her dignity in the span of a 20-minute walk to the lobby. But the true horror was waiting for her outside. As she reached her car, her phone, which she had realized was missing and had been frantically looking for, began to receive a deluge of messages from her family and friends. Her mother was calling. Her sister was texting in all caps. And then there was a message from Elena Sterling. It was just one sentence. "I've changed the locks. Marcus is on the street, and I hope you both rot in the hell you've built." Julianne drove home in a trance-like state. Her hands were shaking so violently she nearly went off the road twice. She pulled into the driveway of the house in Crestview Heights, the house Elias had worked so hard to pay for. She saw Elias standing on the front porch. He wasn't crying, he wasn't yelling, he was just standing there, holding a single suitcase, hers.
She got out of the car, her knees hitting the pavement. "Elias, please," she sobbed, her voice a pathetic whimper. "It wasn't what it looked like. I was lost. I was confused. We can talk about this. 14 years, Elias. You can't just throw away 14 years. Elias looked down at her, and for the first time, Julianne realized that the man she had been married to was gone. In his place was a stranger with eyes as hard as flint. "You're right, Julianne," Elias said, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. "I can't throw away 14 years, because you already did. You threw them away every time you entered that motel. You threw them away every time you laughed at me with Marcus. You threw them away when you brought that man into my home and let him sit at my table." "I love you," she screamed. "You don't know what that word means," Elias replied. He dropped her suitcase at the bottom of the porch steps. "The locks have already been changed. The divorce papers are being drafted by the best firm in the city. Do not call me. Do not come back here. If you step foot on this property again, I will call the police." He turned and walked back into the house, closing the heavy oak door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking home was the final period on the story of their marriage. The months that followed were a descent into a specific kind of purgatory for Julianne and Marcus. The scandal had been too public, too viral within their professional and social circles. No reputable firm in the state would hire them. Julianne went from being a high-flying executive to a woman who couldn't get an interview for an entry-level management position. She had to move into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The friends who had once vied for her attention now avoided her calls as if she were a leper. Even her own parents, though they eventually spoke to her again, treated her with a cold, disappointed distance that hurt more than silence. Marcus fared even worse. Elena was ruthless in the divorce. She took the house, the savings, and ensured that Marcus's access to the children was strictly limited. He ended up living in a basement suite, working a job that paid a fraction of his former salary, staring at the walls and wondering how he had traded his entire life for a few hours of excitement in a cheap motel. Elias, meanwhile, chose a different path. He didn't stay in Oak Haven to wallow in the wreckage. He sold the house, took his share of the equity, and moved 3 states away to a city where nobody knew his name or his history. He threw himself into his work, designing buildings that were stronger and more resilient than anything he had built before. He went to therapy. He learned to breathe again. He found that the silence of a house wasn't something to be feared, but a space where he could finally hear his own voice. 6 years passed. The setting was a large, festive garden party in a different city. It was a celebration for the graduation of Elena Sterling's niece. Elena had rebuilt her life and remained in contact with a few people from the old days, including the man who had given her the truth. A sleek, silver car pulled up to the curb. A man stepped out, looking younger and more vibrant than anyone remembered him. It was Elias. He looked settled, his posture confident. He turned to help a woman out of the passenger side, a kind-faced woman with a gentle laugh and 2 young children who called Elias Dad. As they walked into the party, the air seemed to shift. In a corner, standing by the refreshment table, was a man who looked decades older than his actual age. It was Marcus. He had been invited out of a sense of pity by a distant relative. He was holding a plastic cup, his eyes hollow, and his suit slightly ill-fitting. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Marcus looked away instantly, his face burning with a shame that time hadn't managed to dull. He saw the life Elias had built, a life rooted in genuine trust and new beginnings. He saw the way Elias's new partner looked at him with a respect that was earned, not performed. Further back, sitting on a bench near the garden's edge, was Julianne. She had seen the arrival as well. She looked at Elias, the man she had once called boring and predictable, and she saw a man who had survived her and thrived because of it. She felt the weight of her own choices pressing down on her, the weight of the loneliness that comes when you realize you traded a diamond for a handful of gravel. Elias didn't approach them. He didn't need to gloat. He simply lived his life. He greeted Elena with a warm hug, shared a laugh with the graduates, and watched his children run through the grass. The lesson was etched into the very atmosphere of that afternoon. Life is a long game of cause and effect. You can spend years weaving a layer of lies, convinced that you are the smartest person in the room. You can believe that the people you hurt are too weak or too blind to ever see the truth. But the universe has a way of balancing the scales. Those who plant seeds of betrayal eventually find themselves wandering through a forest of thorns. Those who build their happiness on the ruins of another person's heart eventually find that their own foundation is made of sand. And those who have the courage to stand in the truth, even when it burns, are the ones who eventually find the light.
Elias Thorne had lost a wife, but he had gained a soul. Julianne and Marcus had gained each other, only to find that when the lies were gone, there was nothing left to hold on to. As the sun began to set over the garden, Elias took his wife's hand and led his family toward the car. He didn't look back. There was nothing left in the past worth seeing. He had learned that the best revenge wasn't the email he had sent years ago. It was the fact that he was happy, and they were just a memory he had long since outgrown. The legacy of that Tuesday morning wasn't the scandal. It was the realization that trust is the only currency that truly matters, and once you bankrupt yourself, no amount of regret can ever buy it back. In the end, we aren't defined by the people who betray us, but by how we choose to rise from the ashes they left behind. Elias Thorne didn't just survive a lie, he built a truth that was bulletproof. If you've ever felt the sting of a broken promise, remember that your story doesn't end at the betrayal. It begins at the moment you decide you're worth more than a secret.